Today is Tuesday. It's August the 17th, and our scripture reading for today is Psalm 102. The title of this devotional is Don't Worry, Our God Changes Not. Now, the author of Psalm 102 is not known. However, the title of this psalm may offer some insight into the period in which it may have been composed. The title reads, A Prayer of the Afflicted when he is overwhelmed and poureth out his complaint before the Lord. Now, it's speculative on my part, but I'm in agreement with some scholars who suggest the author of Psalm 102 most likely was one of the children of Israel who was living in exile during the Babylonian captivity. Now, verses 1 through 11, I've given the subtitle, A Cry of Lamentation. And when you read this psalm, you're going to realize it is the time of really just being in the bottom, dark, spiritually. Let me read some of my thoughts to you. Assuming the psalm then was penned by an exile, you and I can understand the pitiful cry of the author who has earnestly prayed and longed for the Lord to lend a sympathetic ear and answer his prayer. He begins to reflect on his miseries, and the psalmist paints a picture of an emotional and physical state that truly is deplorable. Now, he felt his life was passing and that his bones were wasting away. Verse 3. He also notices in verse 4 that his heart was depressed and his appetite was lost. Physically, he observes in verse 5 that he had been reduced to skin and bones. Then he portrays himself like a lonely sparrow that has lost its mate, and he moans that there was no one to comfort him. What a terrible place to be in life, and you and I have all felt that at times where we felt alone. Oh, there are people around us and things were noisy, but the sorrow that we were carrying, it isolated us. It seemed that no one could fully understand our sorrow and our pain. Now, verse 8, the psalmist does not identify his adversary, but his enemy had been unrelenting in his attacks. And we find the psalmist had become inconsolable. He could not hide his sorrows, his tears flowed, and he says that they were pouring down from his eyes into the very drink that he had. And then he compared himself to being like a fading shadow, a grass that withers in the heat of the sun. And he felt he too was perishing. Now, I'm so happy that the psalmist didn't end on that note, because in Psalm 102, beginning in verse 12 through 22, in the midst of his darkest hour, the psalmist looked past this mortal, temporal life, and he prayed, verse 12, But thou, O Lord, shalt endure forever, and thy remembrance unto all generations. Wow. With this hope renewed, he confessed his confidence in the Lord, that God had appointed a time when he would have mercy upon Zion. Now, Zion refers to that mountain range upon which Jerusalem and the temple had been built before it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar's army. Now, knowing the Lord would not forsake Israel forever, the author believed that God had set the time he would renew his favor and Jerusalem would be rebuilt. Now, verse 19 and 20, looking beyond his sorrows, the psalmist was confident. Though God was enthroned in heaven, his eye was always upon his people, and God heard the groanings of his children. Now, verse 21 and 22, stirring hope anew, our author looked forward to the time the Lord's name would be declared in Jerusalem, and the people would worship and serve him. Remember, the remembrance of the children of Israel was of the city going up in flames, the wall being torn down, and the temple upon the mountaintop was burning. And then we come to verse 23 and 28, the majesty of God overshadowing human frailty. Let me ask you today, Have you ever been through dark times when times that you recall how you felt that life was like a roller coaster, and you experienced the physical, emotional, and spiritual ups and downs of life? Our psalmist began Psalm 102 with a prayer and a cry for sympathy. But his faith had carried him to spiritual heights, and he believed the Lord had heard and would answer his prayer. And yet from that pinnacle of rejoicing, the present realities of his sorrow suddenly plunged him into a sensation that his strength would fail him. Verse 23, that his life would even be cut short. Verse 24, that he would not live to see Israel restored to her homeland and the city of Jerusalem rebuilt. And then we come to verses 25 and 26. Then the psalmist remembered. He remembered all that God had revealed about himself as the Creator in Genesis 1, and how the Lord had laid the foundations of the earth in verse 25, and the heavens were the work of God's hand. He foresaw the temporal nature of the earth, the stars and the planets, and that they would all one day perish and would wax old like a garment. Verse 26. The psalmist, though, he believed the Lord. He believed the Lord would change the earth and the heavens like you and I change clothes. I believe our author had in mind some of Isaiah's prophecies as we find them in chapter 65 and verse 17, where Isaiah wrote, "Before, behold, the Lord saying this now, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered nor come into mind." The prophet, this writer surely knew that the Lord had promised Israel, verse 22 of chapter 66 of Isaiah, "As the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed, Israel, and your name remain." Closing thoughts. The earth and the heavens are temporal, and the days of a man's life pass like a shadow. However, the Lord is immutable and eternal, and his years shall have no end. My friend, be confident today. There is trouble in the world, and I can begin naming the troubles, but I'll not do that now. But I want to remind you, whatever the troubles in the world and whatever the troubles you might be facing right now in your life, realize behind every promise of God is his divine character. God is immutable, and he is eternal. Trust in the Lord. Look into the heavens tonight and see the stars, and know that your God placed them there, every one. And even better news, he knows you. He knows your troubles, he knows your sorrows, and he hears your prayers. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.